Well, in addition to honoring the rules and values related to truth-telling and informed consent, another significant responsibility of healthcare professionals is to honor patient confidentiality. Confidentiality is closely related to the concept of privacy, and we want to begin reflecting on that concept. However, as the article in the Stanford Dictionary of Philosophy notes, privacy is notoriously hard to define. The article says that despite its historic prominence, the use of the term is not uniform, and there remains confusion over the meaning, value, and scope of the concept of privacy, unquote. Well, recognizing that difficulty and the ambiguity of the way the term has been used across the years, it does seem to me that there are some significant things we can say about what privacy is and why we value it. Let's look at those. The first thing we can say with confidence is that privacy has to do with limited or limiting access to oneself. It invariably involves a matter of control. One has privacy when one has control over access to oneself. Now, a significant aspect of what one has control over, and particularly as it relates to the healthcare context, is control over information about oneself. Consider this quotation from an earlier version of our textbook. A person enjoys privacy when other individuals do not, without permission, invade what may be called his or her sphere of privacy, a realm of intimate or sensitive information about the person that he or she generally does not wish to share with others or wishes to share with only a small circle of persons. Notice here the emphasis on information, though this sphere of privacy would seem to have larger implications. So consider some of these implications. One is experiencing or enjoying privacy when one can avoid or prevent being seen or heard. One is experiencing privacy when one can exclude others from touching you, or even keep them out of the space near you, your private space, so to speak. Maybe the most expansive concept of privacy, and one that really leaks over into that area of general personal autonomy, is the claim made in the Roe versus Wade abortion decision, which refers to a right of privacy as meaning protection from interference in making decisions about particularly personal matters, like whether or not to have an abortion. The last thing that you should know about privacy and how we define it is that it is a concept that is subject to great cultural differentiation. That is to say, different cultures have different conceptions of what the zone of privacy to which an individual is entitled actually is. So in a highly individualistic society such as our own, we have a very broad concept of privacy. We have a very broad sense of what information and what space and what access to a person should be restricted. Societies that are less individualistic, more communitarian, have a much smaller conception of what the zone of privacy around a human being ought to be. Now, having some concept of what privacy is, noting the difficulty of the concept, we now are in a position to ask why we value it, why it's something that matters to us. The first thing I think that can be said here is that the value we place on privacy has to do with our sense of the value of each individual, the value of the individuality of each human being, the uniqueness of each person, and the sense of individual human identity and dignity that matters to us. It surely relates to the value we place on our capacity for autonomy. Without privacy, we would have little sense of ourselves, it seems to me, as self-determining. If we had no control over access to ourselves, information about ourselves, if we had no control over who can see us and hear us and touch us, we would hardly have a sense of ourselves as something valuable that can govern our own lives, as autonomy says we can and should. You should notice in the Stanford Dictionary article about privacy reference to the work of one Blaustein, who associates the value of privacy with what he calls inviolate personality as the social value protected by privacy. This inviolate personality defines one's essence as a human being, says Blaustein, and it includes individual dignity and integrity, personal autonomy, and independence. Respect for these values, he says, is what grounds and unifies the concept of privacy. The common conceptual thread linking diverse privacy cases prohibiting dissemination of confidential information, eavesdropping, surveillance, and wiretapping, to name a few, is the value of protection against injury to individual freedom and human dignity. Invasion of privacy is best understood in some as an affront to human dignity. Let me suggest one final reason that we value privacy, and that has to do with its relationship to our sense of personal security, given our physical vulnerability, which we've talked about in relation to the principle of non-maleficence. Might it not be maintained that without control over access to ourselves, we could never feel secure? We could never feel as if we were protected from harm and injury, that we would never feel that our vulnerability was respected without control over access to ourselves. Let me conclude this discussion of why we value privacy with this very interesting quote by one Ian Thompson, a philosopher from the University of Edinburgh. He says, "On logical grounds, if we concede the existence of individual human rights of any kind, then it's almost tautologically self-evident that there must be a, quote, right to privacy, unquote. For without it, there would be no private individuals to have or exercise those rights. That the individual should be spiritually inviolate in the sense of being protected from invasion, violation, and abuse of his privacy would seem to be the necessary presupposition of his possession of any of the other individual human rights claimed for him. For example, the right to freedom of speech, freedom of movement and association, freedom of worship, etc." So, it would seem that privacy is something we value because we value the individual and because we believe that individuals have rights. Next time, we'll look closely then at the related concept of confidentiality.